Hello, I'm Palmer Kippola, founder of BeatAutoimmune.com and functional medicine certified health coach. I used to have MS. I don't anymore, and today I want to share my healing journey with you. In order for me to do that, we're going to have to take a trip back in time to the year 1984. Now, if you're not old enough, don't worry about it, just use your imagination. Prince's song When Doves Cry is the #1 pop song on the radio. The Summer Olympics are taking place in Los Angeles, and that's where I am, home from college after my freshman year, a happy, healthy, well-adjusted 19-year-old girl working a summer job as a hostess in a seafood restaurant. One morning, I wake up and the soles of my feet are all tingly. You know that feeling you've had after you have sat on a limb too long and then the blood flows back all tingly? Only this morning, the blood didn't flow back. As much as I shook my feet, I just couldn't get the blood back to my feet. So off I went to work, and that creepy tingling feeling just crept up my legs. In a short while, it was at my ankles, and shortly after that, it was up to my knees, and I knew something was really wrong. So I called my parents. They called the family doctor, who told them, get her to the neurologist at UCLA. So that's what they did. By that afternoon, we were sitting in the neurologist's office, and the neurologist did a cursory exam. By this time, the tingling had reached my chest. Now, the neurologist had me walk heel toe across her room. She tested my reflexes. She had me touch my fingers to my nose with my eyes closed. And within about 5 minutes, and with a spectacular lack of sensitivity, she pronounces, I'm 99% certain that you have MS, multiple sclerosis. Multiple what? We had never heard of multiple sclerosis. She said, if I'm right, there's nothing we can do. Now, we can have a test done. It's called an NMR, for nuclear magnetic resonance image, the scary precursor name to the MRI. But even so, if I'm right, there's nothing you can do. So we left her office with very little information and very little hope. There was no internet. There were no books on the subject. There was nothing we could do to find out more about this multiple sclerosis. So we waited. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, the numbness had reached my chin. And later, when it was time to go to sleep, my mom got in bed with me and she was holding me and crying. And I was crying even harder because by this time, all the areas in my body that had been tingling had gone completely numb. In fact, my body would stay enshrouded in numbness for a full 6 weeks. It was a terrifying time. I am so thankful for my parents, who were absolute rocks. And I'm happy that the Olympics were on TV because that provided a happy distraction. And I'm very grateful for friends who weren't too scared off by this mysterious disease. Some friends brought me gifts. One brought me the book Norman Cousins' Anatomy of an Illness, in which Cousins recounts his own healing journey from a mysterious autoimmune condition with high doses of vitamin C and laughter. Now, the laughter part made perfect sense, so my family and I made it our mission to watch funny things on TV every night. We watched I Love Lucy and Cheers and MASH, and that helped to provide a happy distraction. Nevertheless, the MS persisted. One friend brought a gift that didn't seem like a gift at all at the time. It was in the form of a question. She asked me, Palmer, why do you think you got this MS? What do you mean, why do you think I got this MS? Do you think I caused the MS? Wait a minute. Did I cause this MS? Well, I couldn't let go of the question. I puzzled and pondered and lay on the couch. I had plenty of time to do that. And it came to me in a flash. But for this, we'll have to go back farther in time. You see, I had been adopted as a baby by very loving parents, but my dad had been a fighter pilot, and his way was invariably the right way. And we butted heads quite a bit. One of my earliest memories is my dad is yelling at my mom, who's gained more weight than he would have liked. And he's standing in the hallway yelling at her, and I'm in the hallway with him. My little Duke's up like this. He's yelling at her, and I'm yelling at him. If you don't stop yelling at Mom, I'm gonna make you. I had become a little child warrior. And I viewed my immune system as a proxy for that child warrior. It had become hypervigilant, and if it didn't have a real battle to wage, it would make one up. And that is, in fact, the autoimmune attack. So that hypothesis still rings true for me today, that chronic stress was the reason for the MS, even though now I know there's more to the story. So I'm grateful that the numbness retreated in time for me to go back to college for my sophomore year. It would take a full 2 years for the numbness to completely retreat, but I was well enough to go back to school. So off I went on my 26-year journey of relapsing, remitting MS. Now, over those 26 years, I saw 6 neurologists, each of whom told me there's nothing you can do, except, of course, take the medication, which I resisted for as long as possible. See, I knew there was something that I could do. I just needed to figure out what it was. And when I felt down or low, my dad would remind me, honey, we can beat this thing. You can beat this MS. And I wanted to believe him, and I really did believe him. I just needed to figure out how. So over the course of those 26 years, I conducted more than a dozen experiments, but I want to share the top 4 with you now. The first experiment I did made a lot of sense, since I intuited that chronic stress was in fact the root cause. Then I would need to learn how to relax. So I started doing yoga in 1987. I started meditating in the early 90s. And I noticed that when I was calmer, I had fewer exacerbations of the MS. And conversely, when I was more stressed out, when I had conflict at home or exams at school, or later when I went into the workforce, I noticed that when I was feeling overwhelmed or had a lot of emotional pain, I would have exacerbations almost immediately. One of the most striking examples of this was when I was working for AT&T Network Systems in New Jersey. It was a particularly stressful job, and I had taken a vacation, a very relaxing vacation in the Caribbean. And when I came back into the office, literally the moment I walked in under those fluorescent lights, I was struck blind in my left eye. I felt searing pain that didn't go away for 2 weeks. It would take 3 visits to emergency rooms over that 2-week period and a trip down to Johns Hopkins Medical in Maryland to be diagnosed with optic neuritis, a hallmark symptom of MS. So I noticed that stress resulted in more exacerbations, and being calmer was helpful in reducing those exacerbations. As long as I practiced the yoga and the meditation, I felt better. But still, the MS persisted. So the second experiment I tried was low-fat vegetarian diets. See, I had read in Phyllis Balch's Prescription for Nutritional Healing and the Swank MS Diet book that low-fat vegetarian was in fact the way to go. So I gave it a try. What I didn't say earlier was that for as long as I can remember, I had tummy trouble after eating. I noticed after every meal, I felt this rumbling and distress in my tummy, but I thought it was normal. I thought everybody had this level of distress after eating, so I didn't think anything of it. But I noticed that when I started adding more whole grains into my diet, my tummy started feeling worse. So not only did I have any more symptom reduction of MS, I noticed more tummy distress. So that was my second experiment. The third experiment was medication. I tried for as long as I could to stay away from medication, but an especially persistent neurologist at Stanford insisted that the only way that I could guarantee not going downhill into a wheelchair and perhaps suffering an early death was to take medication. So he offered me the ABC drugs, and I chose one purported to have the fewest side effects. Now, I didn't notice any further symptom reduction in the MS by taking this medication, but I did notice an additional 3 symptoms that I call the 3 strikes. The first strike was superficial. Every place I injected myself with this medication, in the fatty places of my body, I noticed that the fat didn't grow back. This is called lipoatrophy. It's a known side effect of the medication, but it's not talked about very much. That was my first strike. The second strike was far more concerning. One night, 10 minutes after injecting myself as usual, I developed shortness of breath. I felt cold and clammy and tightness and pressure in my chest. I felt like I was having a heart attack. Literally, I thought I was dying. Now, thankfully, I guess, the medication nurse had forewarned me that this is in fact a known symptom of the medication. I don't know how much comfort I took in this at the time, but I call this my second strike. The third strike was after injecting myself as normal one night, I had an injection site that wouldn't heal. In fact, it became infected and I developed a wound that wouldn't heal by itself. It would take 6 months and 6 visits to a wound care clinic for this wound to in fact heal. And today I have a large scar on my hip from what I call my third strike with the medication. So I quit the medication cold turkey. The last and final experiment that I conducted was called gut healing. Now, in 2010, I had learned enough about nutrition to know that what I was eating was probably causing that tummy distress, but it was probably a good time for me to go get checked out by a nutritionist. So that's what I did. I found a functional medicine nutritionist, somebody who could get to the root cause of what's going on with me. And she ran a bunch of tests. One of the tests came back saying that I had gluten sensitivity. Now, I didn't have celiac disease. I had gluten sensitivity, what's called non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And this nutritionist educated me on the perils of eating gluten, how it was inflaming my gut, creating a leaky gut, which possibly and probably was leading to my MS symptoms. This made sense to me because I was eating gluten at almost every meal. I had cold cereal for breakfast most mornings. I had a sandwich for lunch most of the time. I ate pasta for dinner many times. I ate pizza. I drank beer. All of these contained gluten, which meant I was getting a steady stream of inflammatory proteins into my gut that was probably causing the gut symptoms. So from that moment forward, I went cold turkey on the gluten, never again knowingly having gluten. The nutritionist also educated me about gut healing. She gave me herbs and other nourishing substances like bone broth. I started taking L-glutamine to heal the lining of my gut, and I stayed on this for more than a month. I noticed that after about a week of not eating any gluten, I stopped having tummy trouble. And even more notable, within a couple of weeks, I stopped having any and all MS symptoms. And what's particularly striking about this is that at the time, I had developed this new symptom, this new feeling of super heavy legs on waking. Just getting out of bed and going to the bathroom felt like I was walking underwater. But after a couple weeks of not having any gluten, the heaviness went away. The numbness and tingling left. In fact, I've never had another MS symptom ever again. So I call this gut healing experiment my eureka experiment. So let's review the before and after. Between the years 1984 and 2010, I had the signs and symptoms correlated with relapsing remitting MS. I saw 6 neurologists over those 26 years, each of whom took MRIs of my brain and spinal column. I had the lesions on my brain and brainstem. I found out that I had the sensitivity to gluten. Later, I found out that I have a sensitivity to cow dairy as well. And in 2014, by happy accident, I discovered my birth father. And it turns out that he too had been diagnosed with MS 30 years before. Fast forward to 2010 and the years beyond, I have the signs and symptoms correlated with vibrant health. I had discovered my inflammatory elements, removed them, removed the gluten, removed the cow dairy. I healed my gut. I've had a blood test done since that shows that the antibodies to my neurological tissue, like myelin basic protein, are all in the normal range, which means I no longer have MS. A few months later, I decided to see the neurologist to see what he had to say about all of this. And what do you think he said? He said, "I think your MS must have been benign after all." Really? I felt like somebody who had gone back to the oncologist after having stage 3 or 4 cancer, who now had a clear blood test, and the oncologist might say, "You had a spontaneous remission," when in fact, the person had done so much to heal their lives on so many levels, but didn't get the acknowledgement for that. He said, furthermore, we don't know enough about gluten. It's probably a fad. So let's go back to the big question. Why do I think I got the MS? Well, have you heard of the concept of the total body burden? It's the amount of toxins that we can actually store in our bodies until it goes tilt or until it spills over the bucket. So we know we have the genetics for something. That's foundational, but it may only represent about 10% of your health outcomes. And on top of that, what was in my toxin bucket? Well, I had vaccines, every vaccine you could possibly have, including all the ones for travel. I had course after course of antibiotics as a child. I had a mouthful of mercury amalgam fillings as a result of having a sugar addiction. I had sensitivities to gluten and cow dairy. I had lifetime of chronic stress. I had developed a leaky gut and probably a leaky brain as well. It's no wonder that I developed the MS at 19. And how did I heal? By emptying my toxin bucket as best I could. As soon as I found out about my sensitivity to gluten and cow dairy, I removed those from my diet. I stopped eating sugar. I had my mercury fillings safely removed. In short, I modified my genetic expression. So does this mean I don't have the genes for the MS anymore? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is I'll always have the genes for MS. Those genes don't necessarily need to be expressed. So once I healed, I quit my job to study full-time. How is it possible that I could reverse an incurable disease like MS? And what I found was so exciting. I learned all about the root causes of how we can create an autoimmune condition, and I learned about the solutions that show how we can heal. I learned that a leaky gut is central to the development of autoimmunity, and by healing our gut, we can actually reverse those conditions. I started beatautoimmune.com as a resource to educate, empower, inspire, and motivate people who also seek to heal and prevent autoimmune conditions. I then became certified as a functional medicine health coach so I could help other people. And this year, I decided to go back to my neurologist, whom I hadn't seen in 8 years, to get another MRI. So I walked into his office, and the first thing he said to me was, "Palmer, we now know that gluten sensitivity is real. And I bet a third of my MS patients are sensitive to gluten." He agreed that it would be a good opportunity for me to go get another MRI. So that's what I did. And when we got the results, we sat side by side and reviewed them together. He showed me how the lesions had disappeared or were fading. And then he said, "This couldn't be a better story." Now, if you were my daughter, I'd want to make sure that you were still taking the medication as an insurance policy, but I bet you're not going to. In summary, I want you to know that there is so much that you can do to prevent and reverse autoimmune conditions. In the coming months, I plan to create a lot more videos to share with you what I've learned about the root causes and the solutions. If you liked this, if you resonated with my message, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you know someone who could benefit from this information, please share it with them. And if you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the field below. I read each and every one, and it would mean so much to me. So for now, I leave you with this. Hope is real. Healing is possible. Until next time, take good care.